Hi, everybody. It's Josh Schultz. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of some of the cognitive and sociocultural factors that influence language learning, because there are a lot of, as we saw from our the beginning of our course, where we critically examined the myths about language learning and our own personal beliefs about language learning that we carried into the class. Everybody feels that they have some kind of opinion on what makes a good language learner, but research has something to say about that as well. So I'll just briefly go over some of these. So the five factors related to cognitive influence on language learning include intelligence. So intelligence, the first one, intelligence, we always kind of have a common sense notion that, smart people learn languages. Well, la-di-da, doesn't have to be the only defining factor. Two things you want to think about: intelligence and cognitive ability versus education. So we want to think about, do folks have um, access to a new language? Okay, there are many folks that don't have formal school-based educations who are multilingual. So don't confuse intelligence and education, because those are two different things. Um, that being said, language learning aptitude connects to intelligence quite a bit. Some folks feel that language learning aptitude is something that can be determined, whether someone is just has a natural ability for languages, although a lot of research has disproven that as well. Primary language development, well, in simply put, a child's first language and a strong literacy development in their home or dominant language is going to support transfer very well, which brings us to our next indicator, which is our next factor rather, which is language influence and transfer. So there are some studies that indicate that the closer the new language is to the first language, for example, a Spaniard learning Italian, Spanish and Italian, they're close cousins from the same language family, that first language influence may support transfer. And the last factor, one which we cannot control at all, is age. And age has been, although there are multiple studies indicating that older folks can learn a new language, it is oftentimes with an accent and with a pronounced accent, but age is not. We often think of young kids as being able to learn language quite quickly, but adults can also learn language. Kids just generally have more time. They have more time in their hands. They have some of these other personality factors I'll examine that make it a little bit, quote unquote, easier to demonstrate language learning. So personality factors. Yeah, personality is a big factor. If someone's an extrovert, they tend to outwardly show signs of language learning. So they're willing to communicate. They show that WTC, willingness to communicate. If they're an introvert, you might not see open indicators of second language or new language development. So, of course, the indicators may be different as well. Extroverts tend to display stronger speaking skills because they're not afraid of make mistakes. They're out there talking, blah blah blah. Introverts sometimes are more precise with their second language writing and their ability to listen. Anxiety and attitude and motivation are also some factors. So the higher the anxiety, the greater chance that you can have a shutdown. If you're putting a student on the spot, answer right away, or let's have them do a role play in front of the class. Well, boom, your anxiety can go through the roof. If anybody who can remember some nightmares of French or Spanish class, if that's not your first language, how difficult it may have been when you were put on the spot and asked to perform in front of others. It's very complex, of course, and it depends on the age, but anxiety, as Krashen noted, Krashen said, lower that affective filter. Lower the affective filter so students can have less anxiety and be able to produce more. Okay? And then attitude and motivation. Do you want to learn the language? Are you motivated to it? Is it intrinsic motivation? Are you intrinsically motivated, self-motivated? Do you want to be able to learn this language, perhaps to be part of the community, perhaps to read in the second language, or watch films in the second language, or communicate with your neighbors, or communicate with your loved ones, or a partner or spouse, something like that? Yeah, that's a pretty strong indicator of motivation. Extrinsic motivation is also important. You have to learn Mandarin Chinese for an international posting, and you're going to receive a large compensation for doing so financially. That's an extrinsic motivation, also important, also influential. Let's see. Some of the social cultural factors, just briefly, I mentioned primary language development already. Identity and ethnic group affiliation. Schumann's acculturation model spoke to this directly. Dr. Schumann said that the closer your culture is, your home culture is to the culture of the primary culture of the language, the speakers of the language that you're learning. Of course, I'll stop right there and say there's no monolithic culture. Latino culture is complex. Colombians are not the same as Brazilians, are not the same as what did I want to say? Or as Ecuadorians, etc. So, but take this with a grain of salt. But if there are closer in culture to the between your home culture and culture being studied, they said that can be a positive social cultural factor influencing language learning. Last, learner beliefs. Do they believe that they can they see and picture and visualize themselves being part of this new language community and believe that they can learn? So take a moment to reflect a little bit. Think about your own schooling, your own learning. How many of these things happened for you? And as you're applying these or thinking about these factors and influences on language learning, as you're planning your own classroom environment, constructing your own classroom, think about how you will be able to do these kind of things to promote language learning. Consider how a new user of the language needs to be surrounded by the new language. They need to be able to hear it, use it, speak it, listen to it. They need to be able to interact with proficient language users. Of course, if you're in a dual language setting, there's opportunity for that. If it's in a pull-out setting, there's less opportunity for that. Okay, so think about that. They're supported towards their ZPD, the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is Vygotsky's theory, and it's kind of like you take the baseline of what a student can do, or a child or a learner rather can do by his or herself, himself or herself, and that gap between that is a starting point, what they can do independently and what they can do with the support of a more knowledgeable other, like an adult or a peer. That, in between that range, that's the zone of proximal development. So if the teacher is providing some scaffolding and support, what Bruner calls scaffolding, and that support, instructional support, the student is able to get to the goalpost. I just said that they get support and understand the language. Language is in context. It doesn't happen as often anymore, but there used to be a lot of decontextualized worksheet type instructional activities. I won't say completely useless, but borderline useless. There is feedback. There's feedback that emphasizes meaning making and supports it, and is not overly focused on correction. For example, I have a couple of quick rules of thumb that guide me as a teacher is when I can correct a student overtly. One, if the student is clearly using a word or phrase that causes a breakdown in meaning. I'll give you a silly example of this. The word car and elephant have nothing really to do with each other, except maybe it can be both used as a form of transport in some parts of the world. But if the mother's car pulls up and the boy language learner says, there's my mother and her elephant. Well, clearly, okay, that's ridiculous, but clearly that is a breakdown in meaning and you need to overtly correct that. Second, if you see that there's a danger of fossilization, if you see a student repeatedly using a particular phrase or syntactical structure, or phonological structure, morphological structure, etc., in a less than appropriate way, then you may take that as an opportunity for direct instruction. Maybe in a small group of some of the learners who are having that particular issue, you can give them some direct instruction. This has to do with adults. Of course, the teacher's available. They're there to interact and help expand, help them negotiate, help them. Perhaps the adult will recast one of those less than appropriate constructions of language. Recasting, as Gibbons in her 2015 book noted, it just means the teacher, it's a tool. The teacher will kind of repeat what the students say without providing that overt correction. So the student says something like, "Teacher, I go to bed at 8 o'clock last night," and the teacher won't say, "That's wrong." No, the teacher will say something like, "Oh yes, Johnny, you went to bed last night at 8 o'clock," and that kind of reinforcement through recasting is supportive. And using language in authentic context. Let's get that as much as you can to construct purposeful and meaningful opportunities for dialogue. If you provide information gaps in which students have to work together to understand a problem or a solution, if you have them write to people outside of the classroom for real purposes and try to persuade, whatever. This is just nothing to do with, this is not just applied to language learning. All of your teaching should think about how you can best apply what the students are learning to an authentic, real life context. You're going to have students be more invested in learning and have an opportunity to use language. Okay, so that's that. I'm just going to leave it at this. Have a great day.